Hello, privacy.
Hello, axe murderer.
Well, as much as I'm meh on Charmed Season 2, I seem to find myself constantly talking about its good points. To be fair, the episodes in that season that I really like, and so they're easy to praise.
And why go to the horror movies when they come to us?
This one is fairly popular, despite being completely standalone and free of any big spectacular battles or dramatic sisterly moments. We just love it because it's fun.
Pretty little girl.
Phoebe is currently fed up with college boys and rants about how boring they are.
That bad?
I'm keeping his number in case I have trouble sleeping.
Don't worry, Phoebe. I'll happily help you get to sleep. She carries a torch for her first crush, who, lucky for her, is a fictional character in a goofy horror movie from the 1950s, meaning she can just YouTube clips to stare at the... Oh, wait, I forgot. 90s. Anyway, Kill It Before It Dies is showing at the local cinema, and so Phoebe has been reliving said crush to Prue's displeasure.
You went to go see Kill It Before It Dies at the Revival House, didn't you?
No.
And for my WTF Prue moment of the week...
He's a character in a movie. One that, I might add, you weren't even supposed to watch.
Your sister is a grown woman enjoying the best movie genre there is. Get some culture into you, Prudence.
We so have to monitor your viewing habits.
But this is just as satisfying.
Oh, that was an antique, you asshole!
You may notice that the man giving the nagging a gagging is the same Billy Appleby from Kill It Before It Dies. We can thank the Demon of the Week, who goes by the Demon of Illusion, with the power to go onto the screen and influence audiences to violence, where he'll sit back and watch the people with popcorn destroy themselves. Releasing Billy from the screen then gives the DOI some inspiration to send psycho killers from slasher movies after the Charmed ones, since as works of fiction, they can't be killed by normal means, and the sister's powers don't work on them. Glorious hilarity ensues.
I'm being stalked by psycho killers and I hide in the shower.
Oh, and there's a B-plot involving Prue meeting a photographer she idolizes, and a good old broken pedestal ensuing, but I don't care.
The brilliance of your eye is completely destroyed by the ignorance of your mouth.
Back of the net, Prudence.
Hello?
Miss Halliwell.
Mr. Beck.
So for some context, this episode aired in the year 2000, which was at the tail end of the second wave of slashers.
So where are you?
Your front porch.
I've talked about this in other non-Charmed videos, but to clarify, slasher films exploded in popularity in the late 70s, thanks firstly to predecessors like Black Christmas and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but the runaway success of Halloween in 1978 made unstoppable killers targeting teenagers and young adults a cash cow to be milked to no tomorrow. This is where Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and their umpteen sequels come in. The trend burned itself out by the end of the 80s, with audiences growing tired of the rigid morality plays and adherence to formula that usually came with a slasher film. There were still some being made. Holly Marie Combs actually starred in one called Dr. Giggles, with future Angel cast member Glenn Quinn, and Keith Diamond, who'd later appear in Charmed as Inspector Reese Davidson. But the second wave of slashers began in 1996, with the release of Wes Craven's masterpiece, Scream.
Can I be the helpless victim?
Fans of 80s horror tend to have mixed feelings on Scream and the 90s in general, but 90s horror is my jam, and so I consider Scream one of the best films ever made.
No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
It was intended as a deconstruction of the genre that would actually kill it for good by poking fun at the formula and all the familiar tropes. But of course it was such a hit that it redefined the slasher genre for the last few years of the 20th century, ushering in a new era of subversive horror.
This is usually the point where somebody says, let's get the fuck out of here.
Let's get the fuck out of here.
Characters were self-aware and knew the conventions of the stories they were in, and the plot had to find new ways to kill them off.
You know, Jodie Foster tried this and a skin-ripping serial killer answered the door.
This second wave would be considered over by 2002 thanks to the successes of The Ring and 28 Days Later, whose protagonists were adults, and told studios that horror audiences didn't care about dying teenagers anymore. There would be a third wave in the 2000s with a glut of remakes, but that's another story.
This is around the second act, right? When everything's about to be explained? Where's the music we're supposed to talk over to build suspense and hide the exposition?
Chick flick is caught right up in that post-Scream era, with characters being self-aware of horror cliches, never missing an opportunity to point it out.
Don't you just hate exposition?
Don't even get me started.
This was true of late 90s media in general, where self-aware characters and playing with narrative conventions was in, and you can even see trickles of this in the other episodes of Charmed, particularly in the first season, which had more horror influences than the others.
You're perfectly safe here.
Don't say that. In horror movies, the person who says that is always the next to die.
But Chick Flick differs from an episode like The Wendigo, which is a horror homage, but ultimately played very straight and serious. This is a full-on parody we're talking about here.
Dead woman with a knife on her way. Leo stayed behind to calm down the... Where is everybody?
This is Charmed meets Scream. Piper hides in the shower and references Psycho, Phoebe and Prue engage in witty banter with the killers, and the plot finds a way to make slasher tropes still happen while calling attention to them.
It's over. Don't ever say that.
For example, in the original Scream, Sydney complains about how the girl in slasher movies...
She's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
But when Ghostface attacks, the safety chain she put over the door means she has to run upstairs, and that's ultimately where she's safest. Here, the sisters' powers don't work on the killers, since they're not real, meaning they have to run and scream like the girl in a slasher, and at first cower behind the man with literal plot armor, before working out a way to defeat them without their magic.
So Billy said that the only thing that he knows is what's written for him in those movies, so maybe this is the only way that the psychos know how to die, is how they were killed on screen.
And taking the Scream approach rather than the scary movie one works because it allows you to enjoy this proverbial carnival ride without being taken out of the story.
We have got to do something about that.
What's also right out of the zeitgeist is the whole violence in media MO of the Demon of Illusion.
If he's gonna spread violence, he's gonna prey on people who are already open to it.
Alright, so he'll be in horror movies.
Moral guardians have always liked to try and blame certain new media for whatever problems society is going through, and essentially demonize fun. In the olden days, reading for pleasure was going to rot your brain and give you a fever. In the 1950s and 60s, rock and roll music was giving people dangerous ideas.
Music brought to the United States of America by the communist conspiracy to corrupt teenagers.
In the 80s, D&D was going to turn you into a devil worshipper. In the UK, there was also the video nasties panic about violent and explicit horror movies available on home video. Hell, there was even protesting and picket lines over the movie Silent Night, Deadly Night because the killer dressed as Santa. Seriously, when people try to complain that everyone is too sensitive these days, there's practically a whole selection of moral panics from the 80s to reference. Television was going to rot your brain for a while, and in my house, the favourite scare tactic was that it was going to give you square eyes. They were already scapegoating video games by the late 90s, and that one stuck around for a while, but horror movies still got some of the blame, and this was actually the motive of the killer in the second Scream.
I'm gonna blame the movies.
And since the myth that media can turn you into something you're not has been debunked multiple times over the years, it is of course quite nice that Charmed shoots the idea to HE double hockey sticks as well by having the Demon of Illusion cast spells to inspire violence.
Who needs violence when you can make it yourself?
As far as memorable Season 2 villains go, this guy has a lot of potential, but of course he's more of a greater scope villain to allow more outrageous antagonists like the Psycho Killers to command our attention. And while the chick flick title may seem ironic, since it's centered around horror and the 90s was still transitioning out of the girls don't like horror movies mentality, it's interesting when you take into account that the episode has a focus on romance.
I got my first glimpse of romance from watching you on the big screen.
One of my friends recently said she considered Charmed a more feminist show than Buffy because it felt as though it had more of a female lens and voice in parts. And this episode to me feels like an example of that.
I like to hear what you think.
Okay, now you have to be careful not to say that, because every girl will know that you're not for real.
I was surprised to see that it was written by two men. Considering the wish fulfillment of getting to meet and fall in love with a fictional character you crushed on in the past feels like a very feminine touch. And along the lines of Paige's dalliance with the prince in A Night to Remember, which was written by two women. But since Phoebe and Billy is basically me with Ariel, Sailor Venus, and Lulu from Final Fantasy X, and many more, this experience is probably universal. And the stuff between Phoebe and Billy is just sweet.
Oh, you're in my world now. What do you want to do?
It is unashamedly cute and sincere, and Alyssa Milano sells you on the idea of this pleasingly indulgent fantasy that can't last forever, but you can still enjoy for the time being, so that the comedy of the situation is actually downplayed, and you're just left with that warm, fuzzy feeling that only Phoebe could awaken in you so well. for non-horror fans, you would be surprised that this kind of relationship between horror fans and characters from these movies is very much a thing. Add Helen Shivers from I Know What You Did Last Summer to my list for sure, so it's cool to see Charmed bucking tradition by showing horror as a legitimate thing for girls to be interested in. And given that High School Reunion would show that Phoebe was something of a teen rebel, it makes sense that she would be into these genres. And I have to say, Chris Payne Gilbert as Billy.
You pinned me!
That's because the writers told me to, Sally Mae. I mean, you're a nice girl and all, but...
Like Charlie Weber as Paige's prince, this dude is committing to his role.
I think you're swell, Phoebe.
And so, now we have to gush about the episode's signature bit, where the psycho killers attack the sisters in the house. I just have to make my thoughts somewhat coherent. Great cinematography with all these single-take shots, especially this cool one of Prue being chased through the kitchen and up the stairs. And another reason I love 90s studio slashers is that the bigger budgets allowed for camera work like this. The music is also nice and reminiscent of Friday the 13th, which I'm slowly finding more appreciation for as the years go by. And this sounds very Halloween. And this exchange here has lived rent-free in my brain ever since I first saw it.
Hello, privacy.
Hello, axe murderer!
And I loved this bit so much I tried to use it in my most recent attempt at filmmaking. I did give Prue a hard time for this line, calling it cringe, but it's fine, really. It works.
The man is here to save the day.
Billy, it's the 21st century. It's the woman's job to save the day.
And the resolution to the plot does kind of contrive reasons for Prue to save the day, surprise surprise, but it also works, and it's a creative way to kill a demon rather than the standard potion or vanquishing spell, and it does tie the episode's B-plot into the A1 by being a sort of Chekhov's mistake that Charmed used a lot in its time, where one of the sisters messes up, but her mess-up gives her what she needs to later defeat the demon.
I guess you learned something from Finley after all. Yeah, I guess he did come in handy.
And the final goodbye between Phoebe and Billy.
Now all you have to do is hold out for one that's three-dimensional.
Sweet cream on an ice cream sandwich. Why does this work so well? But anyway, Chick Flick is of the pleasingly indulgent variety of Charmed episodes. That's not to knock its quality at all.
He wasn't real receptive to the plan.
It was clearly made by people who had a lot of affection for the subgenre they were parodying, and put lots of work into making it something that horror fans could enjoy and appreciate. Parody always works best when it's done with love for the thing you're poking fun at. See Enchanted or even Scream, which was penned by a fan of 80s horror and directed by a man responsible for several of them. So even if everyone involved in this episode hated slashers with a fiery, burning passion, they did their best to convince me they had the same love as I did.
It's okay, we're too tired for pleasantries. Just tell us.
It's a good comfort watch that's actually sort of about comfort watches, although non-horror fans are eternally left scratching their heads over how we find this sort of stuff comforting. I'm not going to end this by saying to Phoebe, I think you are swell, because I do have to eventually do a video on the Phoebe problem, but in this episode, she is, and more than earns her position as my second favourite Charmed one. And while Chick Flick does not contain the spectacular dramatics or expressive character work that makes up the majority of my favourite Charmed episodes, it serves its purpose, and we love it for it.